There is an old adage that states behind every great man is a great woman. How truly blessed must one be then to have the love, strength and guidance of two such women? Sounds like a wonderful tale of hope, joy and wonder so far, right? If you've listened to the stories we tell, however, you know the most beautiful of endings are preceded by the greatest of tragedies. In a cruel twist of fate, the two women that would bookend the most emotionally trying and testing experiences of this tale would never meet. The first remains a source of inspiration, courage, grace, and love, while the second continues to fight to bring awareness, empathy, and understanding to those most at need in their darkest times. Despite the impact and influence these women would contribute, their lives would never overlap to share the opportunity to celebrate all they would collectively achieve. The idea of no mud, no lotus is certainly fitting here, as despite the sadness between the transition of these two strong women in this one family's life, it is truly now a blessed and inspiring tale. The last chapter in our coverage of domestic violence concludes with the final part of our interview with Arman Abrahimzadeh and Genevieve Lewis here on the next episode of Just Lawful.
Adelaide is the perfect place to set a horror story. You know why all those films and books are always set in sleepy conservative towns? Because sleepy conservative towns are where those things happen. Exorcism, omens, shining, poltergeists. Adelaide is Amityville or Salem, and things here go bump in the night.
Welcome again to Just Lawful, where things do indeed go bump in the night. My name is Daniel Panozzo, and I am once again joined, of course, by my co-host, Sean Fuster.
Thank you, Daniel, and thank you to all of our listeners for joining us once again.
Absolutely. Before we begin, just a huge thank you of always to everyone who's listened, whether you've heard our previous episodes on the broadcast or you've heard them, and if you haven't, we would greatly recommend and really appreciate you going straight to iTunes and Spotify. Please subscribe, rate, review, leave us a 5-star rating, all of those wonderful things. That's how you can help us get our work out to the masses and to those who might benefit from hearing it the most. This is the last episode in this series, but before we begin, of course, if anything you hear is distressing or has been distressing in the last episodes, please make use of the following resources: the Domestic Violence Crisis Service on 1300 782 200, the Domestic Violence Gateway Service on 1800 800 098, the National Sexual Assault, Domestic and Family Violence Counselling Service on 1-800-RESPECT. Of course, as we've said all of this series, zarafoundation.org.au as well as dvsafephone.org. Sean, as we enter, I guess we're coming around the home stretch of this series that we've done. It is the last part of this interview, and it's fair to say we've been through a heck of a lot. Some tragedy, some really hard moments to listen to Arman and his family, his sisters have to go through. When we finished our last episode, we were right at the end. We just concluded the court process and the trial. It's fair to say we're moving into life after.
This is the part where you see people rebuilding their lives, and not only rebuilding their lives, but asking a question of, what can I do to make sure the next person, the next family, the next mother doesn't suffer like we did? And it's very inspiring to see people that are actually able to find it within themselves to do that after such a tragedy, because so many people can't, and that's not a knock. This belief out there that everybody that goes through a tragedy must automatically contribute to the greater world. We don't believe that here. It's not about that. But if you do have the strength to do that, if you can find the reserves within yourself to contribute further, it's a truly remarkable thing and a truly beneficial thing that is deeply appreciated. And what Arman and Genevieve talk about in this episode is absolutely exemplary.
Indeed. A couple of the keys you talked about there, breaking that cycle and changing, I guess, the paradigm and the way we look at this situation, both domestic violence and the elements that create it, and I guess the pressure cooker situation that people live in and are therefore, inherently take on those traits and how they can be changed.
And speaking of taking on those traits, on an individual level, How does a young man like Arman, who has been raised in this manner, who has seen this kind of toxic masculinity, been awash in it his entire development, not perpetuate that cycle within his own family?
It's a great question, Sean. Before we start to pull that apart, you and I, let's go to the source. Before we do any more, let's not take any more time up. Let's get straight into the last part of the interview with Arman and Genevieve. How long was the trial process? It start to finish? How long?
About 3 weeks, wasn't it?
Correct, it was 3 weeks.
Yeah.
And I think it came to a stop when he pleaded guilty. So there
short
were
end.
no other witnesses or no one else
Yeah.
brought in.
The mystery woman never got to give evidence.
No, that's right. No, everyone was disappointed about that.
There is one part of that. Sean, you mentioned you always had the idea, and the way you saw that was that Zola genuinely believed what he was saying. Fair enough. There was a part where he made, and you touched on it, this story of these black demon men attacking your sister, and he was trying to protect her. When you heard that, I'm keen to understand, suddenly we're not justifying it by our culture or our beliefs or my justification as a man, all this. We've suddenly got a fanciful story of this vision almost. When you heard that, did anything change around what am I listening to here?
Yeah, I thought, can I swear on the show? I thought,
You can.
What the hell is this bullshit?
Yeah.
And straight away, the first thing that popped into my head was that because he was trying to plead guilty based on some mental health conditions or something along those lines, I thought, that's the way he's going. He's trying to paint this picture
Right.
about me. What's the word I'm looking for when you hallucinate?
Mm-hmm.
You know, I was hallucinating. This is not what I intended to do. I
Sure.
did what I did because of the hallucinations. I thought, he's going down the mental health path. And
Right.
he's going to try and, get himself, less of a sentence or whatever the story is.
I remember his barrister being caught off guard by that answer. The look on the barrister's face was priceless.
It's probably not something that they discussed
It
before.
was.
Oh,
I don't
okay.
think that was part of the plan.
Okay.
And I can stand to be corrected on this. Heather Stokes can correct me on this if she wants to. But my memory is that the facial expression was, okay, now I have to run with this. And that was something Sandy McDonald absolutely seized upon. So let's talk about these dark, ugly men. And Sandy just
Well, but
incisive.
as you said, I'm going to take by Heather Stokes' response to that, either A, she didn't know it was coming, or it had been discussed and she said, don't go down that path. And, and he
Here we
did
are.
anyway. Yeah, I know.
Well, under pressure, you crack, don't you?
Well,
Sometimes, yeah.
Look, from a court viewer side of things, it was a spectacular collapse. It was one of the most memorable moments I've had in court, and I don't mean to separate this in any way, shape, or form from the seriousness of the moment. None of us expected it. Like you said, after lunch, I was the only journalist there when it happened.
Exclusive.
he's like Peter Parker. He's always in the right place at the right time, and I can't work out why. You mentioned before that when that admission of guilt came, there was a sense of relief from that. So at that point, were you and your sisters, by extension, able to go, okay, there's the admission, we now have some form of acceptance, justification in the right sense, or what was that for you? There was a sense of relief, but what did that moment mean where you've actually heard him admit to this?
It essentially meant that the trial is over and we can go back to work the next day. We can go back to some sort of normality.
Okay.
In terms of any sort of justice, we knew that the sentencing was yet to happen, so we weren't sure what he was going to get.
Sure.
And so, not that you can get any sort of justice regardless of how long he goes away in jail for. Nothing's going to undo what's happened.
Absolutely.
But that was still the next hurdle for us, and so we were relieved. We could go back to work. We didn't have to, sit in this high pressure environment. And really, for us, felt like a pressure cooker because every different witness that came in, from my perspective, I thought, well, what are they going to say? Are they going to undermine something? Maybe it's not something that they saw, or maybe they're having trouble remembering certain things. So every witness that came in, there was a sense of angst because I didn't know what sort of answers they were going to give. So having all of that done and dusted, that was a huge sense of relief. I didn't have to sit in that courtroom a minute longer, and I could go and get on with life.
Yeah.
When the sentencing came around, Justice Sulin referred fairly extensively to the letter your father sent you. talking about how that was symbolic and symptomatic of his entire mindset, his obsession with the money back in Iran, the intent of blaming everybody but himself. Was there any, I hesitate to use the word, satisfaction in seeing your father's own words turned against him in sentencing, or was it just sad?
It was sad, but that was probably one of the moments that I thought, my dad's being caught off guard, and he's a smart, calculated man. He doesn't make too many mistakes. It's come back to bite him. So, yeah,
Bit of karma.
yeah.
Yeah.
Do I dare say it? It felt good that
Sure.
he was now paying for
Absolutely.
what he did.
Yeah.
And truth be told, I was a little bit hesitant for that letter to be used as evidence, because I just didn't know what that was going to do to us, and whether if that was going to cause a diversion, and if that was going to be something that might be useful for my dad. So yeah, I wasn't sure about that, but that wasn't the case. So
It played a role in the downfall. You said it's not possible to be happy with a sentence because no sentence is going to truly ameliorate what's done, and I understand that. How do you reconcile the relief of your mother's killer being jailed with the reality of your father being jailed? Or by that point, had those concepts sort of faded away?
I think I started to sort of remove the title of father or dad from that person. So
Okay.
a dad doesn't do that.
No.
Yeah.
No. So I was in that process of I don't know, what would you call it? Disowning him. I don't know. I was looking at things differently. So there was, that the person taking that stand in that courtroom was no longer my dad. That was just the person. That was the murderer. That was the person that was responsible for my mum's death.
Sure.
That was my perspective. And so it was a process, because I remember seeing him. I was a bit confused. Well, this is my dad. He's still my dad.
Yeah.
But I think after what we went through after the letter, and what his family, or I guess some of the messages that came from his family, I got to a point where I said, "No, enough's enough. This, I shouldn't be confused about this. This is not my father. This is not even the man that I knew."
Yeah. Okay.
And so, by that stage, this was the person that was responsible for my mum's death. This was not my father or my dad.
Yeah.
In the time since, have you had any form of contact with him?
No, so we've had there's probably been a few letters back and forth, but the last time I essentially heard from my dad was when we applied for the victims of crime compensation. The defendant gets their right to respond, and so that was the last time that I heard from my dad, and that didn't even come directly through to me. That went through my lawyer, and a letter was sent through to me.
And I saw at one stage an article on the ABC that you were thinking about approaching him to speak to him. Have you made up your mind about that yet, whether that's something you want to do?
I'm still in the process of looking at ways to possibly do that, or I guess, at the end of the day, I need to be clear about what I want at the end of it.
Yeah.
Because if I'm going to spend my time visiting him, I'm going to be selfish and say this is going to be about me,
Sure.
not about him.
I think that's not selfish after what you've all been through.
I think it makes a lot of sense. Like, what is the objective I really want out of this? If I do this, what's the objective I want? So therefore, I can put it in place. Can I just ask? Just remind us all, what was the sentence in the end?
26
years, correct.
26 years. And how many years are we into that now?
11 years has passed.
So about 15 years technically left on that sentence. Now, something that is the core premise of our show and what we do is that concept of just versus lawful. I think it's fair to say, and it was interesting when you said between the admission of guilt, that court trial finishes, the process finishes there, and then waiting for the actual sentencing. From my perspective, it sounds like it was a lawful decision in that sense, right thing there, and nothing can change it or bring it back, as we know. You consider this to be a just sentence as well?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, really, what's I don't know. Regardless of what he's given, he could be given 50 years. That's not going to change anything for us. But I think when we knew that we were going to get a minimum of 20 years, we thought, well, that's a good amount of time for him to be locked away. Hopefully, for him to change his perspective.
Sure.
And also, hopefully, for him not to be a threat to me and my family.
And that is something, and that is the next place I was sort of working towards. We put that lens over everything we cover. Is it lawful and is it just? And quite often we come across, you'll get one or the other. You'll often get lawful. It's genuinely controversial, or we can debate whether it's just. I think in this sense, and coming directly from yourself, it does sound like it was a lawful decision. It's a just decision in that sense. The prospect one day that he may be returned back to the community. Do you have any thoughts or feelings around that at this stage, one way or the other? Is that something you've bothered to give yourself time to think about yet? I know.
I think I started thinking about that the day after the conviction or sentencing.
Really?
Okay, sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because I started calculating. I thought, all right, well, 26 years, how many years has gone
Absolutely.
past? How long do we have? Yeah, it was something that bothered me at the start.
Okay.
But I think as time goes on, and especially now, he's got another 15 years.
Yeah.
If he's not a threat to me and my family, we don't want anything to do with him. And if he doesn't
Sure.
and if he stays that way and doesn't harass us and bother us, then he can go and live the remaining of his life. I mean, that's my perspective, but I don't know whether if my wife has given any thought to that, because now we have a child.
Of course. And I was thinking by
so
extension,
at some stage I'll have to tell Raphael about his grandparents from my
Correct.
side. I'll have to
Yeah.
tell him the story. I'll have to get him to appreciate and understand.
Approximately how old will Zola be if and when he's released? If we give it another 15 years, how old would he be at that
so
point?
he was born in 1955.
So we had don't look at me like that. So we had 15.
Come on, Rain Man.
Yeah. So 36, he's going to be about 80-something years old.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That sounds about right.
Yeah.
I'm a journalist. Don't look at me today.
Yeah, no. He does words, not numbers. Okay. So as you said, if and when he's released, he's going to be an older man.
Yeah.
And as you said, it's not something at this stage that you're looking to have anything to do with him in your life. Go do whatever you do. Yeah. Okay. That's. As you said, you still got 15 years to consider that premise as well.
Yeah, but that's the thing. That's from my perspective.
Sure.
I don't know.
Well, let's bring Genevieve in here, because we've hit the point in the story where things transition across now to the coronial, and that's of course around the time you two met. So Genevieve, tell us about meeting Arman and becoming part of this bigger thing.
So I met Arman, I think, neither of us can remember exactly when we met, so it's not romantic in any way like that.
But it also means nobody's going to get in trouble for forgetting the
Correct.
date. I like
Exactly.
it.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's good.
It would have been sometime, I think, in 2015, maybe late 2014. I started working for the Minister for Status of Women in 2014 after the state election. And I remember and I took over, the Status of Women portfolio, and measures into domestic violence falls under that portfolio. And I think one of the first things that popped across my desk, I was entirely new to ministerial advising, very green, had no background in domestic violence. And one of the first things I read was the coronial inquest findings.
That would have been quite the thing. I've referred to that as the most damning legal document I've ever read in my career.
It was huge. And Adelaide being Adelaide, one of my very best friends was also the judge's associate on the trial.
There you go.
I remember she was a bridesmaid in our wedding. So she had talked to me about the trial. So whilst I followed the trial as well as a person did in the community, I also had her kind of telling me things about this horrific trial she was sitting through at work. So I wasn't unfamiliar with the case when I started to read the coronial inquest, but I remember it quite clearly being, a very devastating document. And then I started to be involved. Obviously, the government of the time was under a lot of pressure to respond to the recommendations made by the coroner.
Guilty as charged. As part of that pressure.
Yeah.
As was the man sitting next to you.
Yes. Yeah.
And rightly so. The recommendations were all very valid and needed responding to. And so I started sitting in on some of the discussions, and I think that must have been when Arman and I probably crossed paths at some point. And so to that day, that's some of the most valuable work I think that I've ever been involved in. And my eternal memory of meeting Arman at some point was I was just so impressed with this person who was trying to turn such a devastating event into something positive. He was so focused on the advocacy and rectifying the systemic issues in the system, which had meant that had failed his family. He was focused on that. And I was so impressed by that. And we crossed paths a lot because there's a lot of events and things in ministerial advising, and Arman was at a lot of events doing advocacy work. And my minister was a huge fan of Arman. She thought that he was the nicest man ever. And whenever
She's correct.
Yeah. Whenever I wrote her speeches, she would always make me phonetically write his name. So I was very down with the surname. And yeah, I remember also I was sitting in a meeting, lurking at the back like I used to as an advisor. And it was with the Premier at the time, and Arman was on the phone, and he was on site somewhere because he was still keeping a 9-to-5 job, which I just thought was incredible. He was trying to do all of this incredible stuff at the same time as keeping down a 9-to-5 job and, create a living for himself and continue his life. And so I continued in that portfolio probably for about 18 months. And so as part of that, I just happened to be part of the negotiations that he and his sisters were involved with the government in supporting the foundation start, so the Zara Foundation. I attended that launch just by chance because I happened to be going with my minister. So I feel like I was along for part of his story for a lot longer than before we got together, because I stopped being the ministerial advisor for that portfolio. I moved on. I still used to go to a lot of events in the advocacy space around domestic violence because I just happened to have interest in it and I wanted to continue to be involved in it. And so we used to still see each other. And then at some point down the line, I think he slipped into some DMs on Instagram, and as all good romances start. And we talked about catching up for a coffee because he used to be an old stakeholder. And I distinctly remember, we started talking a lot in the lead up to this coffee, and it morphed into a Friday night drink instead. And I remember I was telling my housemate, and I was like, is this a date? I'm not quite sure. He used to be a stakeholder.
For those in radio land right now, Arman has a massive grin on his face right now.
I was just about to say, I'm looking at the smile on his face. I'm telling you right now, yes, he very, very successfully morphed that into a Friday night date. Absolutely did. Well played, by the way.
Yeah. Well, and it was. It turned into a date, and I think he probably took me to, and the funny thing was, I think the thing about me having known a lot of his story and being involved in that, it meant that our lives were they fell into line very easily.
Yeah.
Because I had not an intimate understanding of what he'd went through, but I had a background knowledge and some sort of understanding and ability to comprehend what a huge part of his life was and how dedicated he was to that.
And on some level, that had to be very... I'm going to speak for you too. It had to be comforting not having to tell your backstory.
Yeah.
I mean, you had someone who came in with an understanding from a professional perspective. Then when you move into a personal perspective, you've kind of already got that relationship aspect where you don't have to bring all this up. You don't have to go over that again. So it must have been, sounds like it was a great match. Just right place, right time. That's great. And you mentioned it, and we're going to come back to it in a moment, the Zara Foundation stuff, because I know you're now part of that process. But that is a big piece, as you mentioned. You mentioned a number of times the advocacy work that Arman has done since that time. And Sean and I are really big advocates of what can you take out of an experience to move forward that you can offer others through that process, and what can you make better from a situation. Was it from day one that you went, okay, I've got to advocate for this to get something worthwhile to come out of this process?
But you know what? What me and my sisters went through, I didn't want another family to go through.
Yeah.
I thought, well, everything that we have been through, the failings, they can be addressed. They can be fixed. And so another family doesn't have to go through what we went through. What do you know? You can actually make a difference. You can actually, lobby the people that need to be lobbied and reminded about these things. The people in power who essentially have the power to make those improvements and changes. You can get to them in this way. And I wasn't necessarily being nasty or going out and saying, well, you have blood on your hands. Here before us, we had a coronial report. Let's see what the recommendations are. Let's see what we can take from this. Let's see if we can go even above and beyond this, because there are things in that report that needed to be addressed to try and close up some loopholes and some gaps that existed with some of the services that the government agencies were providing, and even in terms of communication between the domestic violence sector and some of those government agencies. But even above and beyond that, in terms of, well, what can you do to try and prevent some of this stuff from happening?
Yeah.
My mindset was, let's try and close these loopholes. And then once we did, it's kind of like, you kick a couple of goals and you get energized.
Build some momentum, and then what's next?
Yeah, these improvements, these changes have happened. So what else can we do?
Yeah.
And I think it was from there on that we started to sort of shift our focus towards establishing the foundation.
Well, let's talk about that, because we talk about what's next and what is next. Yourself and your sisters were instrumental in getting up the Zara Foundation. Mm-hmm. From your perspective, A, how important was that for you? And B, what's the meaning? When you said this is our intention, what we do, the objective is this, talk to us about what that was all about for you.
So I can't take any credit for the foundation. And I won't, because what essentially happened was I had a conversation with my older sister, Atena, her and another lovely lady, Maria Hedges, who happens to be the CEO of Women's Safety Services. Mm-hmm. So Atena and Maria had a conversation where they wanted to explore what a not-for-profit could look like. Mm-hmm. It was late 2014, because I remember that Christmas New Year period. I was thinking about, what would a not-for-profit look like? What would it be? What would it do? What would it be named mm-hmm. after? How will it operate? Will I be working in there? Will I be outside of it? Mm-hmm. I didn't know anything about the not-for-profit world. And so once we had a few preliminary conversations and meetings early 2015, we kind of figured out that there's a gap in the market, and that was financial literacy. Economic empowerment wasn't really something that any domestic violence service looked at, or even any government agency.
Yeah.
And just spell that out for the listeners. So what is economic empowerment in the domestic violence space?
So one of the things that we experienced ourselves, and we know that many participants of the foundation come across, is the control that's taken away from them. And in that, there's financial control that's been taken away by the perpetrator, which means that no money goes to the victim. The perpetrator controls everything. And in that, sometimes we've come across participants who have come through the foundation who have said, I have a $20,000 debt for a car, but the car is not in my name. The loan is in my name. And so you come across some odd things that have happened, but it's, once you sort of come across a few like that, they're no longer unique or odd. It's something that just happens out there.
Yeah.
Financial control is something that we do hear about a fair bit through the foundation, and it's something that no other, at the time of the foundation was established, no other not-for-profit or nor government agency was addressing. And so we realized that this is a gap that exists, and if we try and fill this gap, this will be something that hopefully the participants can utilize to try and put themselves on a brand new path, and something that they can get onto once they've gone through a crisis service. So once they've gone through a domestic violence shelter, once they've, some of them might be looking at getting restraining orders, some of them might be going through family court. Every single participant is at a different stage. For us to sort of put the foundation together and to try and focus on that gap, that was probably the first step. Mm. From there on, everything else that we offer through the foundation is something that I guess, came about as a result of us evaluating one of our programs or getting some feedback from participants, or, as you do, you run some pilot programs, you learn and you adjust or I guess, evolve to try and, stay relevant and try and help your participants. So 2015, we held a number of meetings with domestic violence service providers across the metropolitan area. And I remember we had essentially it was a report that was written by Professor Anne Edwards, who was an emeritus professor at Flinders University. And in that, she highlighted the need for economic empowerment to be addressed, because in that report, she mentioned that the number one reason why women don't leave abusive homes is for safety for themselves and for their children. The second reason is financial dependency.
Yeah.
Once we saw that, we said, well, the domestic violence service providers and the government agencies are the ones that provide that safety. The financial literacy and the financial dependency is something that we can probably do through the foundation. From there, I believe it would have been August or September 2015 that we finally managed to put a constitution together. We had a few interim directors on the board. We had one staff member. We found a consultant that was able to be a facilitator for our financial literacy program. And we had, I think it was 5 participants, our first pilot program.
Yeah.
One participant dropped out because we know that women have every different woman has a unique journey. She was still at that crisis end where she had to focus on her own safety and the well-being of her family. Yeah. So she wasn't able to finish that program, but the other 4 women managed to finish the program. And I think even from there on, 1 or 2 of them managed to find themselves employment. And that's one of the things that was highlighted to us was that, these women come through our programs with so much talent and potential, but because they've been mistreated, abused, and suppressed by these perpetrators, all they need is a program like this to realize their own potential, have that confidence, and essentially have some form of control that's been taken away from them. Yeah. And then they can go out and as we saw, find themselves work and be financially dependent. So that was the initial bit, and I guess from there on we evolved, and we had financial counselling to one of the services that we provide. We added a grant scheme called Opportunity Knocks, and from there on, I was on the board for a little while. My older sister was on the board, but when we put the constitution together, we essentially put a clause in there that we wanted a family member or a proxy of the family to stay on the board at all times. And doing work like this can be exhausting for my sister and I. And so we decided to have a chat with my wife, Genevieve, and ask her to see if she's interested to go on the board. Yeah. And knowing her expertise and her background and also her interest, I thought she would be the perfect candidate to go on the board of the foundation. And so in terms of the operational side of things and what the foundation does, I couldn't talk to her any more than that. Yeah. Genevieve would be the perfect candidate to speak about the foundation.
And I think that's great. And it's a great segue for Genevieve to come back into the conversation. As you said, like, with your interest within this space, for you now to sit on the board, how important is it for you now to be not just the representation of the family on the board, but to be a part of the foundation and the good work that it does in itself?
Yeah, it was incredibly important. Even I think I had started thinking, a little while ago when Arman and his sisters were ready to give up, their position on the board, whether I would be interested. For me, I mean, partly it is I do have an interest in that area, but also for me, it's also really important for family legacy. I never had the opportunity to meet my mother-in-law. I find that something really difficult because family is very important to me, and my family, Arman, would know. He joined a very close-knit family when he married me, and so having Zara be present and a part of our lives continuing, particularly now we have a son and her first grandson, is very important to me. And so, yeah, it is partly that legacy work, and it's partly also just a genuine passion. And also I think Zara does a really bespoke service very well. Domestic violence is incredibly complicated. The women who come through our programs are in very varied, diverse and complex situations. And the women who work with them through this recovery period, which is very different from a crisis period. And I think that there's often a lot of funding and focus placed on the crisis period because that's the bit people really see and understand. Yeah, people, someone's escaping a home, they need to have somewhere to go. But these women are in situations, they have to rebuild their whole lives. They have to find what they want to do beyond a relationship that was often very all-consuming. And the service that Zara provides through that in helping these women set up their lives again is just it's so important. And just the stories we hear of women who've gone through these programs and gone on to do really amazing things is just, it's amazing and incredible. And the women who work there's about 5 or 6 employees now in the foundation, and just watching the foundation kind of go from this startup phase in the first 5 years and on to the next phase, it's a great time to be involved and on the board. And I'm really proud of the work that we do tirelessly, essentially, on a volunteer board and in a space that is often, it's not, I don't want to use the word glamorous, but it just doesn't get the publicity that it deserves often.
No, and it's part of the developing understanding of all the complex factors of domestic violence. We said earlier the difference between the trial focusing on the physical act versus the emotional abuse. We're starting to get a better understanding now as a society of the denigrating and deleterious effect of the emotional and verbal and financial control. The idea that you don't just get someone and rescue them, you also then have to support the period after the rescue is something that is a slowly dawning concept for many people.
Yeah, these women, if you have been so depleted and so closely controlled for years, you're not in a position to just go into employment straight away. We have to really wrap services around these women and provide them with support in order for them to be able to, find their purpose beyond what was a relationship that was very detrimental to them. But also, as Arman said, the financial counselling, it's just practical things a lot of the time. And it's often those logistics that you don't think about, credit card debts that can really saddle someone down and prevent them from starting a new life. You can't pay rent if you're trying to pay off your credit card debt.
For those out there, zarafoundation.org.au, we will pump that as much as we possibly can and we'll shamelessly plug it here, as we should. It's a testament to yourself and your sisters to get this up and running. It's a testament to you, Genevieve, that you are so passionate about it to do that. And please, everyone who's out there who needs this sort of support, make sure you go to this website, thezarafoundation.org.au. I want to shift gears really slightly. I'm incredibly interested because you have gone on to be an incredibly respected member of our community, and you've got such wonderful commendations for that work. I'm going to look at your lovely wife because I want her to talk about it. How proud are you of the man that he's become today? And we said we were going to check back in about a report card, right? We mentioned that a long time ago in this interview. Talk to us about the man you know.
Don't tell him everything. How I'm a slob at home.
I'm sure you occasionally help with the dishes, I'm sure. But, you've got to be incredibly proud of the man that he is.
Oh, I'm so proud of the man that he is. And even more of, apart from all of the accolades and the awards and, all of those things, which at the end of the day are just, their awards, he's an amazing dad. And I think that men in this situation, they have they're at such risk for being part of a cycle which remains unbroken. I mean, I think one of the things I realized when becoming a parent is you really parent the way you were parented. So if you don't have the role model to base your parenting on, then you have to find that elsewhere. And he's the most amazing dad. And at the moment, he's our son's primary caregiver. I've gone back to work and Arman's taken 6 months off work and they just have a ball together. And I think it helps that our son is essentially like a small version clone of him. So yeah, I'm so proud of all of his advocacy work, but I'm most proud of the father that he is. And I knew he was going to be amazing, and he has just done exactly that. We're desperately trying to defy the gender norms and create a life for our son where there's, no expectations, cultural or societal expectations around who he is, and he can do and be whatever he wants and escape those notions of toxic masculinity, which are still so prevalent in society today. Other than that, I think we do put effort into our relationship and we check in a lot and we communicate a lot. Huge events have a real way of bringing up grief in people. And so I was certainly aware of that in the lead up to our wedding. I was having such an amazing time planning it with my family and having their involvement. And we were really privileged to have his sisters involved, but it was certainly very obvious that his mum wasn't there, and she was incredibly missed on the day and through the process. And when we found out that we were having a baby, that was, we knew that we were going to be feeling that sense of she was missing from that process too. And so we have to check in, we have to communicate about it. I always just ask Arman to be honest about his feelings. There's no really right or wrong. And if he needs to seek the support to find, if he can't talk to me about it, there's professionals out there. I think we're all better people if we speak to professionals about the things that we're going through in life.
Could not agree more.
Arman, is there anything else that you would take out of your experience that you would offer to anyone out there who might be going through, a similar situation or might be having to face some of the same circumstances you did?
I get this question a lot about what would you do differently? I was ashamed of what was happening in my family home, so I didn't talk about it publicly. I didn't seek any sort of assistance. I think one of the things that I would say is if anyone is going through similar sort of things and they feel like they need to reach out and get assistance, A, not to be ashamed of it, but B, get that assistance, because if we had reached out earlier, then maybe we wouldn't be in the situation that we're in now. But I also know that, when you've been betrayed by your own blood and flesh, you don't feel safe, reaching out for assistance anywhere else. Help, as we know it, is out there. Whether if you're the victim or whether if you're the perpetrator, regardless of who you are, there is help out there.
With that, I just want to thank you so much for joining us, coming in and being so giving of yourselves and your experience and your time today.
Oh, thank you. Thank you both for having us, and thank you for your kind words.
Thank you for having us.
Sean, it's fair to say we are both big admirers and advocates of Arman and Genevieve and the work that they're doing. Really appreciated their time.
Absolutely. Now, Daniel, there is one more voice we need to talk about in all of this.
Sure.
And that's South Australia Police.
Mm-hmm.
When we started recording this series, before we started recording this series, we reached out here on JL to South Australia Police and said, we're going to be talking about the case, we're going to be talking about domestic violence, we're going to be talking about particularly the coronial inquest, the recommendations that were made, the changes that you've put in. We were hoping that we could get some sort of response from SA Police.
Fair to hear what they've put in place and how they feel about improvements.
Exactly right. Now, just before recording this episode, we received an email response. I'm going to read it onto the air. Domestic violence investigations and prosecutions of these matters are taken very seriously by SA Police. We give the highest priority to the protection and ongoing safety of victims and their children. The impact on victims of domestic violence abuse is significant, pervasive, and ongoing. Prosecutors must prove a criminal offence beyond reasonable doubt. We work very closely with the victims, who are key witnesses in the prosecution process. There are times when those victims do not wish to proceed in the criminal process for a number of reasons. We listen to victims with their safety and welfare as one of our primary concerns. Our aim is to consult with the victims during the ongoing court processes, but there may be, on rare occasions, where the evidence supports a reasonable prospect of conviction, that we may proceed with criminal charges when not desired by the victim in order to keep them and the community safe.
Okay. Look, and far be it from me, I'm just going to say, that did sound quite vanilla and a little bit generic. I would have hoped that they might have celebrated the improvements they've made, because I think that's appropriate. However, we appreciate that we received that response from SAPOL.
There's a couple of other things that we need to talk about as well. It's all very well to talk about the great strides that have been made in domestic violence. We've talked about the past 20 years.
Yes.
Things have gone cyclical within the courts, but in the community, the understanding's gotten better. We've seen people like Arman, Genevieve, the Zara Foundation, everybody push the envelope, make that understanding out there. Here's what I want to tell you, though.
Yeah.
As of right now, only 1 in 5 people arrested for acts of domestic violence receive convictions in South Australia. Just 10% of persons arrested are jailed. More than 60% of cases are dropped by police and prosecutors before they ever reach trial. And for the offence of strangulation, the specific offence of putting your hands around the throat of another person, in South Australia you only have a 1.9% chance of being convicted of that offence, and 91% of all allegations are dropped before trial.
Sean, you are right in saying we have talked about, and rightly so, some of the great advances and strides that we've taken when it comes to how we, as a community and as a group, talk about, expose the horrific situation of domestic violence. When you read those statistics, however, it's clear that as far as we think we've stepped forward, we have taken minuscule, not even quite baby steps towards bridging some of this distance.
One of the hashtags that is used in the world of domestic violence advocacy is not one more. I want to propose now that we need to say not far enough.
Yeah.
Because that's what we've done. We have not yet gone far enough with our understanding, with our approach, with marrying that growing understanding with the legal process, with the courts process, and with the understanding of the judiciary. There is so much more work to do. It will be done not only by the advocates out there, but it needs to be done by all of us as well.
Agreed. And I think just to let's put some stark reality, the spectrum from one end to the other around this. From those statistics that you read out, where it is, less than, it's 1 in 5 that, and all those things, and 91% of accusations or charges are dropped before they even get to a court process. That married up, or even just compared against the fact that we still in this country alone have one woman dies every week at the hands of a partner or former partner, someone who was in their own domicile relationship, that intimate space. When you look at the disparity of one end of the other of that spectrum from the statistics you just said and the horrific offences that are still occurring, there is such a, there's a void there. And I'm not pointing fingers at anyone in particular. We said SAPOL and our policing has put improvements in place. We've put more exposure on this horrific situation that is domestic violence. There is still clearly so much more that needs to be done. What are the holes that we need to plug here?
For my money, the first hole we need to plug is within the judicial process.
Right.
That understanding needs to lift. We need to see penalties being handed down that are demonstrably deterrent. We need to see some mental agility put into the setting down of restraining orders. We need to see that sort of thing followed up at that preventative level as well. We need to fix things at the end of the process, at the end of the meat grinder, but also just before people hit the meat grinder of the court system as well.
Yeah.
It needs to be a holistic look at how we bring people into that court process and where they are at the other end.
It's fascinating to me that we are clearly recognizing this situation. We are making arrests in this situation. And somewhere between that and getting to a court process, and even if we get there, the amount that then don't, fulfill the concept of a conviction, or for whatever reason, there is something still missing, as I said. And for mine, there is a massive piece that, there's still something here that there's a missing element to this. And I think, as you said before, not one more. Already too many.
That's exactly right. And it's all well and good for everyone out there to say more research needs to be done. Then do it. Now is the time to actually grasp the nettle and say, we see these statistics. We know the problem. Grasp the nettle and figure out what needs to be done.
With those statistics ringing in our ears and, bringing our coverage of what is, as I've said many times, such a complex situation and amounts of circumstances, we are going to move on away from this. I think we've given this huge exposure. Please, we hope that, as per usual, if anything that we have spoken about has sparked any concern or distress within you, you make use of the following services: the Domestic Violence Crisis Service on 1300 782 200, the Domestic Violence Gateway Service on 1800 800 098, the National Sexual Assault, Domestic and Family Violence Counselling Service on 1800-RESPECT, of course, the zarafoundation.org.au, as well as dvsafephone.org. We just want to thank everyone for coming along on what has been a very trying journey about a very sensitive and evocative subject matter. If you followed us, thank you so much. If you've heard the broadcast on 5AA or you followed us on either iTunes and Spotify, we'd love for you to go to those platforms, rate, review, give us 5 stars, leave some commentary. It helps us get our algorithm up and up. It moves us up in the charts and gets us out to the people who may take real benefit from hearing this message. If you'd like to, of course, get in contact with us, you can do that at Just Lawful Podcast on Facebook and Instagram, at Just Lawful Pod on Twitter. You can, of course, continue to follow Sean and all of his work with the Advertiser and Adelaide's True Crime at Sean Fuster on both Facebook and Twitter. And until our next episode, we once again want to remind you, enjoy our work, but don't become our work, and we'll speak to you next time on the next episode of Just Lawful.